Hi and welcome. Part 1 of this chapter introduces the timeline, explaining what it is and how it can drastically help our gaming experience, breaking it down into 3 logical blocks. I've used this approach since my very first article about this topic, and I've found it quite useful to explain the timeline. Next, now that the purpose of the timeline is clear, we clarify a number of concepts and procedures, so we don't have to open too many parentheses during the in-depth timeline discussion. Part 1 touches the fundamental radar operations, such as mating, sanitization, and which mode suits best the various phases of the timeline. Part 2 will add more information about basic concepts, such as definitions, the probably familiar cranking and notching maneuvers, then the contracts, a series of pre-brief decisions and standards that make the engagements much more smooth. Finally, a quick look at the crew comms. Although this study is aimed to both single and multi-crewed fighters, I found this topic useful during training for both types of aircraft, especially if you use modules such as the Air Macchi MB39 or the Casa C101 Aviojet for practicing. Before starting, a shout out to my patrons and friends on Discord for their words of encouragement and support, especially in this period where a lot is going on. So thanks lads. A timeline is, simply put, a template, a bullet list. It is a construct that helps crews to standardize an engagement and operate better as a unit and with other units. For example, a timeline suggests when the crew should commit to intercepting a target and taking responsibility for it, then when to focus their radars and engage, and finally when to leave the fight or proceed to the merge. Timelines are critical to new players, as they often feel lost in the sky without understanding what to do when. These templates partially address the issue, providing a path to follow. The vast majority of us have, at a certain point, found themselves in the blue virtual skies, eager to engage the little blip on the scope, just to realize that we have no idea where to start. Yes, we can charge valiantly at the enemy, but as a twisted modern Don Quixote de la Mancha, we may end up surely popping like fireworks, to eventually realize that our Indomitus attempt was not wrong, but our awareness and game plan were a lie. If you've been in this situation, the timelines are a first, simple step towards a greater understanding of aerial engagement. Since my first approach to timelines, I found that breaking it down into 3 logical blocks can be useful to better understand the process. The concept of time is substituted by range to the target. In the first block, the section works at a broad level with the controller to build situational awareness and a picture. Then, when a certain criteria are met, or if instructed by higher authority, the section declares the intention of committing. The following step sees the section defining a plan and executing it. This includes using the sensors and launching missiles. The last step is the follow-up to the previous action, following a plan. The section may decide to proceed and execute another timeline or leave the area. As mentioned, the first step is mostly about awareness and coordination with the controller. Depending on how the mission is briefed and who has the authority, fighters can commit on their own will if certain criteria are met, transitioning from sensors mode aimed at maintaining awareness towards a greater focus on the picture and specific groups within the picture. In this phase, the controller usually communicates using bullseye, and the section correlates the group of interest with the radars. Depending on the mission task and objectives, the section may move to intercept and potentially engage one or more groups in the picture. Block 2 is where things get interesting. In premise, the section takes responsibility for one or more groups in the picture and prepares to intercept and or engage. Now the attention moves from the big picture to the internal organization of the section. Sensors are focused on the targets. Each fighter aims at a different contact or contacts, and the missiles are launched. Post-weapon employment, the section turns to reduce the closure rate and assesses the situation. This final part can become a rinse and repeat with another BVR fight or a knife fight if the section enters the within visual range and merges with the targets. This sentence is very simplistic, as a lot happens in this phase, and it is critical for the section to maintain awareness, and merging is not always a good plan. The other outcome, which more rarely happens in DCS, especially in modern scenarios, is a simple bug out, where the fighters leave the area, or so do the targets. Now, this was a very quick and dirty look at the timeline, but surprisingly enough, for our gaming purposes, it's not really much more complex than that. What makes an engagement difficult, especially in the beginning, is how fast the timeline runs, the necessity of good awareness, the comms, and the coordination with the wingman. It can be a lot initially, so take your time and practice. Eventually it will become second nature. The section is composed of 2 aircraft, each with its own radar. No matter the number of bars and maximum azimuth supported, a single radar cannot cover the whole sky. That's why it is more efficient to stack the 2 radars volumes and focus them on different areas. Each part of the sky is called an Area of Responsibility, or AOR. The management of such a concept should be pre-briefed. In fact, if a contact appears in the AOR of the wingman, it can get tactical lead until the end of the engagement. However, if the wingman's Rio is a new player, the leader may want to avoid this. This is a typical scenario where a pre-briefed contract can be useful. So the total volume scan is therefore much bigger using this technique, and this ensures that no contact besides the known groups are in the area. This process of looking around, so to speak, happens in the timeline and is called sanitization. Personally, I find this fundamental and I can't count how many times it saved my virtual hours, especially on casual servers. Back to the AORs, the process of splitting the airspace is called radar mating, and it vastly depends on the capabilities of the fighters we are flying. For example, US Navy suggests RWS 140 degrees, 6 bars and scale 80 nautical miles, and to mate radars at 25 nautical miles. This allows the leader to cover between 40 and 15,000 feet, and the wingman between 25,000 feet and the ground. The Tomcat does not have the 6 bars option, it's either 4 or 8, and it can cover up to 130 degrees in azimuth. A Hornet instead supports 6 bars and can open up to 140 degrees. The process itself is rather straightforward for modern aircraft. Both the 16 and the 18 show the aircraft altitude bracket around the cursor, so following the US Navy input, just put the cursor at 25 nautical miles and adjust the elevation. The Tomcat initially had some issues, as the altitude brackets were not displayed in relation to the cursor. So years ago I had to invent one of my silly workarounds by calculating approximated angles. Nowadays the TID shows the altitude brackets, so the procedure is very similar to the one followed by modern aircraft. This topic is much more complex than it may seem, and touches technological limitations, doctrine, procedures, and especially common sense. Generally speaking, 3 main families of radar modes are used. Search modes such as range-wide search and STT single target track. Somewhat in between, we have track-wise scan. Search modes usually have no restrictions in terms of azimuth and bars, while STT is fully focused on a single target in order to provide the best information and a solid lock, at the cost of the ability to see anywhere else. Trackwise scan, as mentioned, is somewhere in between. It works by illuminating a certain volume at a fixed interval, but such a volume is rather small. Using the F-14 as an example, this is how big the airspace seen by the HOG-9 at 10 nautical miles from an altitude of 20,000 feet is. A fully open range-wise search covers 130 degrees and 8 bars. Trackwise scan, instead, works by refreshing the targets every circa 2 seconds. To do that, trackwise scan provides 2 settings, either ± 40 degrees 2 bars or ± 20 degrees 4 bars. When you plot these settings and compare them to range-wise search, we're in for a shock. As you can see, it's like watching through a keyhole. This rather bluntly shows why trackwise scan should not be used while slaughtering on a cap track, because you are blind to the vast majority of the airspace. Finally, what about the US Navy radar mating range, 25 nautical miles? I had to crop the fully open range-wise search, but you should be able to see right away how 2 radars stacked in this configuration can cover almost everything in front of them. STT instead should be used during the actual missile employment. In DCS, besides the F-14, trackwise scan is fundamentally without drawbacks, so it is ubiquitous. Hopefully this will change soon. And that's it for the first part of chapter 4. I hope you have enjoyed the journey so far. Thanks for watching and take care.